My name is David Lee Summers, and this is an excerpt from my novel Dragon's Fall, Rise of the Scarlet Order Vampires. The year 32, in Saxony. A group of carts wound their way along a Roman road, really more of a trail, that cut a swath through dense forest in the barbarous lands of Germania. One man huddled in the back of a cart, pulling a wrap around him to stem the encroaching evening chill. Already he missed the sunshine of Judea, his homeland. With a sigh, he looked down at a chest that contained 2 precious items he had been charged with keeping safe. He thought of the man those items had belonged to, who died so cruelly at the hands of the Romans. Joseph of Arimathea had not known the Rabbi Jesus of Nazareth very well before the crucifixion, but he had known the teacher well enough to know that he had been a special man who did not deserve the death sentence imposed upon him. As such, he had offered his tomb to the rabbi's body so it could be laid to rest before Passover. Since that time, he had been caught up in a series of events that now propelled him toward the farthest corner of Roman influence, the island of Albion. Looking skyward, Joseph caught sight of an eagle flying above them. The eagle started flying overhead soon after he joined the caravan in the north of Rome. It scanned the forest, apparently hunting for mice and other small prey. At first, Joseph thought it had tagged along to scavenge from the tiny caravan, but it never seemed to prey on the trash the humans left behind. At some point, Joseph assumed that the eagle would turn southward to return to warmer climes as he wanted to. However, the eagle continued to follow the caravan. As the shadows grew long, the caravan came to a halt. Joseph covered the chest with a canvas tarp and hopped from the cart to help gather firewood. The eagle lit on the cart's side, seemed to examine the tarp-covered chest, then closed its eyes. The caravan's guide was a retired Roman centurion named Gaius, who had served in Albion and claimed to know the route from Rome to the island well. Joseph had been delighted that the ancient warrior was more interested in Joseph's money than the politics of Judea. "I don't blame you for wanting to get away," the centurion had said. "Albion is sure to be a lot quieter than Judea, what with the Jewish uprisings. I've heard they have a new, what do they call it? A new Messiah practically every day." Joseph had pursed his lips at the time and remained silent, even though he began to believe what many whispered before he left, that his rabbi, Jesus of Nazareth, was in fact the one true Messiah. Even many of Jesus' closest followers had been afraid to admit their belief in the days and weeks following the crucifixion. Joseph himself was not a close follower, though he admired the man very much. At that, Gaius had the fire started. 2 women set up cooking pots and began assembling a pottage and flavored it with meat and cheese. The men gathered around the fire and started rubbing their hands and holding them toward the heat as fog began to descend. "Oh, what miserable weather," grumbled Joseph. "It don't get much better where you're going," laughed Gaius. "You'd better get used to it." "I thought you said that Albion was a pleasant land," said Joseph, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, it's temperate enough, sir," said the retired centurion. "And the people are nice, as long as you don't wander too far west or north." "Is it true what they say about the Picts in the north?" asked a man who was traveling to Gaul. "Do they paint themselves blue and fight like demons?" "Aye, they do," said Gaius. "I was in a few fights near the Caledonian border, and I never want to go back." The group fell into silence as the women finished the pottage. They ladled it into bowls and passed it around. Before scooping the pottage into his mouth, Joseph simply sat and held the bowl, letting the warmth permeate his fingers. Finally, he delved into his meal and let it warm him from the inside out. As they ate, the fire grew dim. One of the men stood to retrieve more wood, but stopped short when something moved in the forest. Joseph looked up and noticed that the eagle had opened its eyes and followed the man's gaze. "What is it?" asked Joseph, but the other men quickly shushed him into silence. Gaius stood slowly and crept toward his own cart where he retrieved a bow. He nocked an arrow and aimed at something moving in the forest. Joseph thought he caught a sight of gray fur, possibly a wolf circling around the campsite. After a moment, the figure emerged from the trees, and Joseph breathed a sigh of relief when he realized that it was not a wolf, but a pale man wearing a wolf's skin. Gaius kept his arrow aimed at the stranger. The stranger spoke in a language that Joseph didn't recognize, presumably one of the Germanic languages. Gaius spoke a few tentative, halting phrases at the man, and the man replied, at which point Gaius lowered the bow and arrow and put his head back and laughed. "Why, we do find ourselves joined by a wolf," explained the centurion. "For that is this man's name, Wolf." He stepped closer to the fire. "He wishes to warm himself. He says he's alone." The people around the campfire nodded assent, and men beckoned for the man Wolf to join them. "What say you, Master Joseph?" asked Gaius, returning to the fire. Joseph opened his mouth to answer, then looked up to see the eagle staring at him. Something in the bird's gaze told him that he should object to the man called Wolf's company. Joseph shuddered, then shook away the feeling, thinking he was beginning to hallucinate. He forced a smile. "Please, join us," invited Joseph. The man said something, and for just a moment, Joseph thought he heard the phrase, "Thank you very much," in perfect Aramaic. The circle opened next to Joseph, and the stranger sat. Joseph of Arimathea shuddered in spite of himself, feeling waves of cold from the man called Wolf. A woman offered pottage to the stranger. He waved her offer away, simply preferring to warm his hands by the fire, although he did take a goblet of wine when it was offered. "So, Master Joseph, what is it you carry in that chest you guard so closely?" asked Gaius as he sipped his own goblet of wine. "Is it gold or jewels? Perhaps that's why you are reluctant to let a lone stranger share our fire." Joseph's cheeks warmed, partly from embarrassment and partly from the wine he himself consumed. "No," he said, shaking his head. "It is nothing more than a cup, much like this one," he said, holding up the goblet, "and a scroll written by a teacher from the village of Nazareth." "That must be some scroll for you to guard it so closely," said the man traveling to Gaul. "What is it, a map to buried treasure?" "Or perhaps the secret to life eternal," joked Gaius. Wolf looked up suddenly at the caravan leader and said something in his native language. Gaius shook his head rapidly, smiled, and then said something in response. "He says that life eternal is no blessing, just a curse. I told him that it depends on who you spend it with." Gaius put down his goblet and patted the rump of a passing woman. She rolled her eyes and continued on. "You may be closer to the truth of what's in that box than you think," muttered Joseph under his breath. He took a sip of the wine, then looked up. "My teacher brought good news about our God, that he is a God of love and forgives our trespasses." All but one of the men around the fire laughed. Joseph looked up and found Wolf staring at him intently with ice-blue eyes. For a few moments, Joseph felt the campfire fall away. His feet pounded the ground as he ran through the woods alone looking for prey. Through strange eyes, he saw himself falling upon a woman, then an old man. He sank his teeth into their necks and drew the blood from them. He found a question floating in his mind as a dead child fell from his arms. "Would your God forgive me that?" Joseph swallowed hard as he blinked and realized he had not moved from his seat by the fire. Gaius said something about Jews and their gods that couldn't keep them from slavery at the hands of the Romans, Egyptians, and others. Joseph remembered that horrible moment when he pulled the broken and bloody body of Jesus from a Roman crucifix then placed it in the tomb. He remembered the moment 3 days later when Mary of Magdala told him that the body was no longer in the tomb. He was certain that grave robbers had stolen the body, but in the following days he grew far less certain. Yes, thought Joseph, my God has the power to forgive, if you have the power to believe. When Joseph looked up at the fire again, he realized the men and women were pulling out their bedrolls. Wolf still stared at Joseph. Forcing his eyes away, Joseph drained the rest of his wine, stood shakily, and went to his cart to retrieve his own bedroll. Joseph awoke a few hours later. The fog had lifted, and wan moonlight filtered through the trees. He rolled over to go back to sleep when a branch snapped. Sitting upright, Joseph saw Wolf standing near his cart. He pushed the blankets aside, prepared to stop the stranger, when the eagle spread its wings. At first, Joseph thought the eagle would fly away, startled by the stranger's approach. Instead, it leapt forward and began to glow. The eagle transformed into the figure of a man with feathers on its head instead of hair and landed between Wolf and the cart. "The contents of that chest are not for you, Blutsauger. Be gone." "What are you?" asked Wolf, squinting his eyes against the golden light emanating from the man that had been an eagle. "I am an angel of the Lord sent to see this chest safely to its home in Albion." Without further warning, the angel drew a sword and swung it in a perfect arc, sending a spray of blood from Wolf's chest. The stranger howled much like a real wolf, then turned and ran toward the forest. As he did, he seemed to fold and crumple, falling onto all fours. Joseph of Arimathea was convinced that he saw a real wolf loping away amongst the trees. When he looked back at the cart, the angel had vanished. The eagle sat perched on the cart's wheel. Joseph of Arimathea fainted.